Great, thank you. I'm gonna set this up and go through the first piece of data, and then Sean will talk about our second two data sets and conclude. So it would not be a stretch to say that congressional approval is at an all-time low, that trust in government is at a low, and that things that we generally don't like lice, Brussels sprouts, and colonoscopies, rank higher than the United States Congress. The good news about all of this is that there seems to be this commonly touted solution about how to solve the ills of Washington and how to bring productivity and collaboration to Capitol Hill, and that is to elect more women. This commonly touted solution is linked in part to the fact that women are collegial and they like to work together. So there's this notion that women in Congress develop social relationships with each other, and they're more likely then to care about the social fabric of the institution itself. And we don't have to look very far to see examples of this. Here's a bipartisan White House dinner. Women on both sides of the aisle in the Senate are dining with Barack Obama. Here's a bipartisan trip to the theater organized by Barbara Mikulski. Here's a bipartisan softball game where the women in DC take on the media. Here's bipartisan bowling night just a couple of months ago with cute little outfits. Now, the Democrats and the Republicans did play one another, but it's women very, very happy. Now, the problem here, obviously, is that men don't develop these kinds of relationships, but because women do, it instills a sense of trust and cooperation. I should note, this is the conventional wisdom. It instills a sense of trust and cooperation even across the aisle. And this happens not only theoretically, but the women in Congress say that this is the case. So Donna Edwards said, softball has really become important to me. It's a good, wonderful way for us to get to know our colleagues. Amy Klobuchar said the 20 women in the Senate have formed such strong friendships of trust. Those relationships are going to make a difference when we get into what matters, such as passing a budget. Or Susan Collins, women span the ideological spectrum just as men do, but we're more likely to collaborate. So there's this notion that because they develop these friendships outside, they instill this sense of friendship and trust inside, and that's going to matter because it's going to lead them to be more likely inside the chamber to work together and be problem solvers. And the media have certainly perpetuated that idea. Time magazine, after the shutdown, women are the only adults left in Washington. U.S. News and World Report, a woman's place is making Washington work. This is not a photo from this exact incident, but after the blizzard in DC a couple of months ago, it was only women in the Senate who showed up at work the next day. And so this is the general sense. This is why we need more women in Washington. And it's intuitively appealing, right? Friendships in the workplace we've seen in other disciplines lead to organizational success, in part because people want to avoid damaging the relationships they've built with each other. Women are more likely to prioritize these and value friendship and collegiality. We've seen that again across disciplines. And even in politics, we've seen at the state legislative and sometimes the municipal level, women are more likely to work together and cooperate. When it comes to politics, especially at the federal level, though, we're a little bit skeptical. Party polarization obviously constrains the ability of any male or female lawmaker to work together on the basis of sex alone. In the U.S. Senate, stark differences have been uncovered, and those party differences always and consistently trump the gender differences that are found. And frankly, this is the case even on women's issues. A member's sex doesn't predict roll call behavior. This was seen in the 103rd through the 105th Congress, and the same thing was seen in the 108th and the 109th. So we basically want to test this. Is this the case? In order to figure out whether women are more collaborative, we first look at a data set that is going to allow us to determine social engagement among members of Congress. And this is a little bit tricky because we can't just look at who plays congressional softball. For example, it's an all-women's team. We know we can't just look at whether women participate in bipartisan dinners because it could very well be the case that men go to dinner with each other too, men have a drink, men go to a sporting event, and it's just not particularly newsworthy, so it doesn't get picked up. Fortunately for us, there are two really important activities that happen every year in the Senate. The first is the Secret Santa gift exchange. You laugh, but this is pivotal. Started by Al Franken in 2011, it's a good way to cut through the partisan divide, he says, and members of the Senate are, it's just your traditional Secret Santa. Although I had a student in my class who was an intern for Al Franken, and she said they take it very seriously. They go office to office to ask for participation the same way that they would co-sponsorship on a bill. And so if you choose to participate, you buy a gift for somebody else. There's also Seersucker Thursday. This was created by Trent Lott in the 1990s. It's a Thursday in May where the members of the Senate are encouraged to wear seersucker to figure out what it was like to be in the Senate when there was no air conditioning a long, long time ago. It's this jovial activity. Unfortunately, there are no official records, but newspaper accounts, phone calls to senators' offices, a conversation with Trent Lott and the Senate historian allowed us to assemble official rosters of these activities. And so obviously, if the conventional wisdom is right, then the first step is determining whether women are in fact more likely than men to participate in these kinds of social engagement activities. So let's turn first to Secret Santa. They are. Started in 2011. We had an equal number of women and men participate, but in every year after that, the number of women participating exceeded that of men. And when we turn to Seersucker Thursday, we find the same thing to be the case. Women systematically are more likely than men to participate in the activity. The one sort of strange event was 2004. This was the first time that women were overtly invited to participate, and Dianne Feinstein bought seersucker suits for all of the women in the Senate. That died down, but you can see that after that, the numbers still withstand this gender difference. So now Sean will talk about whether this translates into anything.
So Jen gets the good news, I get the bad news. So first we're going to look at procedural votes in Congress. These are the votes that include everything having to do with setting up the rules for debate in the floor of the House. Motions to adjourn, motions to instruct conferees, motions to restrict filibusters in the Senate, and then motions to table amendment also in the Senate. And our thinking is that if women truly do participate at greater rates in some of these social activities, perhaps they act differently when it comes time to actually voting on legislation and moving things along. Are they more likely to be problem solvers than problem creators? And so we can compute procedural voting scores by selecting out of the 24,000 votes in the House and the 15,000 votes in the Senate, a data set comprised only of procedural votes. So in total, there are more than 7,000 votes in the Senate, almost 7,000 votes in the House, and 7,000 votes in the Senate. We use the W-nominate algorithm in the R program to calculate by Congress procedural polarization scores. We can think of just in the same way as DW nominate, where the most liberal people will have -1 and the most conservatives would be +1. So when we look at procedural votes for the Democrats in the House of Representatives, we see that there's very little difference between the way that men and women are voting. In fact, it may even be a little bit against conventional wisdom in that women are casting more liberal votes, if you will, less problem-solving votes. These are the House Republicans, and the scores almost completely overlap by the time we get to the end of the data series. So let's see if there is more evidence in the Senate. It looks like the women early on in the time period, there was a difference, but they were less likely, again, to be the problem solvers, if you will. And then we have the Senate Republicans. Here, except for this, 103rd, I believe, the women in the Republican women in the Senate were more likely to be casting more bipartisan votes on these procedural matters that are moving things along. When we do a multivariate analysis controlling for some of the other things that we think might matter in member voting, what kind of district they came from, how safe they are, how long they've served, again, we find a little bit of evidence in the wrong direction for the House, and we have no statistical significant results among the Republicans in either chamber or the Democrats in the Senate. Our third data set, we're not willing to give up yet. We're looking at who's offering amendments in the Senate. Of course, you can defeat bills in the Senate by voting them down, or you could filibuster them. There's a new strategy that's been being implemented, starting, of course, with Jesse Helms in the 1990s, and that's just the continuing offering of amendments. If you continue to offer amendments and then demand roll call votes on them, these roll call votes can take up to 30 minutes, and it's a way of really stalling legislation. So right, it's not as overt as voting it down or filibustering it, but nonetheless it achieves the exact same goal. So who are the people that are offering these amendments? We think that, and it's a really rough measure, and we get that, but we're trying to find some differences. So we think that the more amendments the senators offer is an indication that they're more likely to try and create problems. So our thinking, if the conventional wisdom is true, the women are going to be offering fewer amendments on the Senate floor. Of course, we're not looking at the House because the restrictions on offering amendments in the House is a much different process. So we code all amendments from the 103rd Congress and the 113th Congress, almost 4,500 different amendments, and we look to see if there are gender differences. When we look at Senate Democrats, not much. When we look at Senate Republicans, not much. So when we do the multivariate analysis, controlling for those things that we think might matter, again, we don't see much differences. So in total, when we're looking at all the procedural votes, we have 28 because we're looking at 14 different Congresses, 2 different parties, and then the 11 Congresses, 2 different parties in the Senate. We find some gender differences, but they're rarely in the conventional wisdom direction. So conclusions and implications, it could be that women might contribute more to a civil culture in the Congress, and there's something normally attractive about that. Perhaps more women will run because of the social niceties that women are contributing to the House and the Senate. but it's really unfair to expect them to govern much differently given the highly polarized era in which we live. And as a personal note, I can't be disappointed that party polarization in Congress trumps gender differences.
Thank you.